Welcome to the Retention Edge podcast. So, for this week's episode, I'm sitting down with someone who's built financial clarity from the founder and CFO side of the business. I'm talking with Nate Littlewood, Fractional CFO and founder of Future Ready CFO, where he helps seven-figure e-commerce and CPG brands make smarter decisions using their financial data.
Hi, Nate. How are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm great, thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, great. So, you have an interesting background. I'd love maybe for you to start by telling us a bit about your story.
Yeah, of course. So I am a fractional CFO. I run a business called Future Ready CFO, where I basically work with founders of seven-figure e-com and CPG businesses. And essentially what it boils down to, I basically help them make more confident decisions using their data and their financials, and essentially help them, I guess, fashion the future and, make strategic decisions about how to grow their businesses using insights from their own financials and data. I've been at this for a couple of years now. Prior to getting into it, I was an e-com founder myself. I bootstrapped my own e-com business to seven figures off the back of a pretty small Kickstarter campaign. Along the way, I've done some mentoring with an accelerator program that was based here in New York. And prior to getting into the world of startups, which I guess was about a decade ago now, I spent the first half of my career working on Wall Street at an investment bank. So, yeah, got pretty deep into the world of finance through that.
Awesome. And just for context, I think I'm curious, at least to understand a bit more about the brand that you built. Can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. It's called Urban Leaf, and we were specializing in indoor and herbal edible gardening. So think microgreens, mushrooms, hydroponic supplies. We had, dwarf and mini fruit and veg kits and that sort of stuff. I learned so much about that, so much about the e-com space through doing that. You know, had an okay outcome. I'll be honest, like it wasn't a life changing outcome for me at the end of the day. But the lessons learned from that, and being in the founder CEO seat, having to experience like, how do we make payroll? How do we finance this purchase order? Which of these marketing channels should we be, experimenting with? Having spent many years living that and breathing it day in, day out, I think has certainly been a huge help to doing what I'm doing now, which is helping other founders, navigate, similar decisions and issues.
Right. So having been in the founder seat and now having helped many founders in e-commerce, what do you think is a typical misconception that founders have about finance?
Well, I think the biggest problem with most founders and finance is it really stems down to their relationship with it, right? Finance and numbers often kind of tell us things that we don't want to hear. Particularly, and this is particularly prevalent, I find, with, mission driven or purpose led founders. And, they like to be able to tell a story to their friends and family. Hey, I'm building this, awesome business and I'm selling product, and look at all the wonderful things I'm doing. The issue arises, though, is that oftentimes the finances and the numbers can tell a slightly different story. And it can create this issue called cognitive dissonance, where you're wanting to go around and say, hey, my business is going great. But then the finances are like, yeah, actually not so great. There's this, and this problem. And unfortunately, the way that this plays out for a lot of founders is that they just don't engage with it, right? They don't look at it as much as they should. It's an uncomfortable truth that we don't really want to engage with because, it sometimes tells us things that are a bit confronting. So a big part of what I do is help founders foster a more a more helpful or more functional, more collaborative approach with their finances, and help them, overcome that overwhelm, overcome what is often a feeling of guilt, right? A lot of people go through a feeling of, hey, I probably should be paying more attention to this than I really do.
Yeah.
And, I help people through that process. And ultimately, what I aim to get people to is a point where they start to realize and appreciate their financials as a strategic asset and something that can actually make their lives easier if managed and digested the correct way, and also, help make their path of growth simpler, right? When you understand the numbers and when you understand the products and channels and efforts that are actually helping grow your profitability of your business and which are the ones that are not, it makes it so much easier to prioritize. I'm sure you've heard of the 80-20 Pareto principle. Like, the reality is that there's probably only a very small subset of the mess and noise and things that you're doing that are driving 80% of your results. And you really, really need to understand finances and numbers to be able to identify what that is. And it's a huge part of what I help folks with.
Right. So you kind of help them uncover that truth, and that actually can creates a lot of clarity and helps them set a strategy and make better
Exactly.
decisions.
Yeah,
You have
exactly.
something that it's a hidden profit audit, right? So I'm
Correct.
curious to understand, where do these profits tend to hide? What are where do you go looking typically?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. Yeah, the hidden profit audit is something I often, do with brands when we're just kind of starting out our relationship, as a way of, building trust and showing people that I know what the heck I'm talking about. But you're right. There are a few very, very common places where, 9 times out of 10, I'd be willing to bet that I can find a problem when we look through a e-com or CPG businesses financials. So some of the most common sources of these profit leaks are, number one, the gross to net revenue, right? So the gross revenue is basically what your customer pays, right? If you have a product that's selling for $100 and the customer pays, it's kind of the face value of your product, if you like. That face value of the product multiplied by the number of units that you sell is theoretically your gross revenue.
Yeah.
But there's a whole lot of adjustments that we need to make to that, right? There's discounts, there's refunds, there's coupons, there's sometimes coupon leakage that we need to think about. There's replacement orders, there's shipping revenue, or maybe there isn't shipping revenue because you've decided to give free shipping on everyone who orders more than $40 or something. I don't know. But the difference between the gross and net revenue is often a huge source of profit leakage. Particularly when brands are chasing volume, right? If people aren't getting the top line growth that they wanted and they're starting to feel distressed about inventory, and it's like, oh, I'm overstock. I wanted to do $4 million this year, but I'm only tracking for 3.5. Let me put some coupons and promotions and discounts and blah, blah, blah. I need to try to move more product. Like, we're, very commonly going to see an issue with, leakage there. To put it into context, like, an average e-commerce business will usually give away about 13% of their gross revenue in the form of all of these discounts, which is to say, if you started with a $100 product, your net revenue is likely only going to be about $87 or so. Now, to put that into context, the average e-commerce business is only generating an EBITDA margin of about 8 to 10%. So if you're giving away 13% at the top, that's a big deal in the context of the 8 to 10% that we're aiming to end up with at, when all is said and done. And I've seen instances of, brands who have, closer to a 98, 99% ratio there, but I've also seen examples of brands who are closer to 80%. And so, that leakage on the top is one of the first places that I'll look. Some of the other places that I'll look are really around inventory management. Inventory and cost of goods sold is typically one of, if not the largest cost for these businesses. And it's I guess there's two very, very common problems I see. One is around a lack of alignment between profitability and inventory and marketing, right? So brands are basically not putting the marketing dollars and they don't have the inventory investment that lines up with the products that are actually generating the bulk of their profitability. And that, creates excess storage costs. It can create shrinkage issues. It might also create issues with, excess financing costs, for example. Another huge problem I see is brands that carrying too much inventory in an absolute sense. And I think a lot of this comes from the fact that the risks of having not enough inventory, or the consequences of having not enough inventory, are much more acute and painful than the costs of having too much inventory, right? So if you think about this, if you don't have enough inventory, you're likely to have a stock out. You have a stock out, you've got angry customers, you've got missed sales, you've got a low conversion rate. Like, these are all things that slap you in the face as a founder, and you're going to become very, very aware of them very quickly. The flip side, however, if you have too much inventory, there are costs to that, but they're much more subtle. They come in the form of, aging inventory, shrinkage, expiry dates, product obsolescence, financing costs, warehousing costs. Like, they do all show up in your financials eventually, but they don't slap you in the face like a stock outage does. And because of that, I think founders often have a tendency to play more on the side of being overstocked than they do, optimally stocked. And all of this, leads on to costs of debt and financing as well, right? I see most founders have usually got a pretty good handle on their numbers down to the gross profit or even the contribution margin level. Some founders understand things as far down as, the EBITDA level. But when you start getting to the bottom of the income statement, in other words, like the net profit line, that's impacted by things like financing costs. And I can't tell you how many times I've encountered founders who do not understand the true cost of the financing that they're using. And unfortunately, that means they often get themselves into a situation where they're doing all this hard work, they're moving all this volume, they think that they're generating, a positive profit from it. But the reality is that the bank or the lender is actually the one who's taking the lion's share of the profit being made here. And so they're, unintentionally got themselves into a debt spiral, which basically means that they're working for a lender rather than working for themselves. And I think that sucks.
Yeah. I'd imagine that some of these problems are down to maybe not having visibility into these numbers, especially at that product level. Is that true? And what do you tend to see most commonly being the mistake here?
Yeah, well, you can't solve a problem that you can't see. So yes, I think that visibility and understanding how to access and process and, what to do with all this data. I mean, it's 2026, right? We live in a day and era where we're constantly overwhelmed by data and information. Like, it's highly unlikely that an e-commerce founder is going to be sitting there listening to this going, oh my God, I wish I had more data. Like, no, that doesn't happen. What actually happens is kind of the opposite of that. And the challenge that most folks run into is not about, having, not enough data. It's like, I actually need to distill this data down. I need to get a simplification of this data. I need someone who can process this and understand everything that's going on and just tell me the 2 or 3 things I need to worry about. So yeah, that's, a huge problem. Something I see a lot.
Obviously, we talk about retention. I'm curious about your view over retention versus acquisition, and what should founders should prioritize. And we both understand it really depends on the context, but maybe you can say that you can say more to that.
Yeah, good question. And I know that this is a topic close to your heart. I guess as a finance guy, the way that I think about retention is really the relationship between CAC, or customer acquisition cost, and lifetime gross profit. That's perhaps not as common a term as lifetime value. So, for those who haven't come across it, I'll just clarify. Lifetime value tends to refer to the revenue that you would generate over the course of a certain customer relationship. It's a somewhat helpful metric when you're talking about tech or SaaS businesses where the cost of delivering an incremental product to a customer is close to zero, right? Like if you've got a software business, it doesn't cost a huge amount to deliver an extra product to an extra customer. But when you're talking about a physical product business, the cost of delivering an extra product to an extra customer is actually quite high. And so revenue, or LTV, is really not the right way to think about it. I use lifetime gross profit, which is basically the profit or gross profit that we would generate over the course of that customer relationship. So some of the things I look at and think about are, what the relationship between those two numbers look like. Every single e-commerce business falls into one of three categories. They're either first order profitable, which means that they're making enough gross profit on that first order to pay back the CAC. They're profitable, but not on first order, in which case we need to be optimizing for the repeat buy, because the gap between initial acquisition and the point where we reach break even, we are often cash flow and profit negative during that period, right? I have to pay to acquire the customer, and it's not until some point in the future where I break even on that. So that kind of presents a financing challenge or a finance problem that I need to untangle. Then you also encounter some brands that are never profitable, right? The CAC is in excess of that lifetime gross profit, in which case paid customer acquisition is not a great strategy for them. So, I need to be something I obviously need to get my head around pretty short order when I'm looking at a new account. And depending on the problems that we identify, I'll customize a strategy to fix the relationship between those numbers. What I'm seeing right now for a lot of my clients is that we're seeing challenges with paid customer acquisition. Meta and Google are not working like they used to. And a couple of my clients at the moment, we're actually taking some budget out of pay-per-click and in reinvesting it in content and creative and UGC. And, I think for a couple of them at least, we have, a cost per click problem that we need to address on the front end. For some of my other clients, where we have fairly low repeat purchase behavior, we're talking about the product catalog, right? Like, what could we be doing to get people back to your store more often? I don't want to share too many details because I'm bound by confidentiality. But like in certain categories, in certain products, like I don't work with a mattress company, but a mattress is a good example, right? Once you bought a mattress and, you filled every bedroom in your house with a mattress, like you don't need to go on buying more mattresses, right? There are some categories where repeat purchase is just hard. So what we do with an example like that is figure out, okay, what else could we be doing there? They might not want to buy a mattress, but like what else could we potentially sell them? Because once we've got that person in our database, our ecosystem, we need to try to figure out how to monetize them, as much as we can.
Makes sense. Makes total sense. What are cash conversion cycles? I think I've seen that on your LinkedIn. Can you explain that term?
Yeah, so a cash conversion cycle is basically the amount of time that it takes for cash to move through your business. So the way that I like to explain this is you think about your business as a pipe or a funnel, right? What happens at one end is you're buying inventory and you're outlaying cash to purchase that inventory. It sits on your warehouse floor for a certain period of time, and the amount of time that it sits there happens to be called the days inventory outstanding. And then at the other end, you eventually sell that, right? That is essentially the fundamental business that all of these companies are doing, right? Acquiring inventory, holding it for a period, selling at the other end. Now, the cash conversion cycle basically measures how long that entire process takes, and it has three key components. The largest and usually the most important is the days inventory outstanding, right? So you could have 3 months worth of inventory at any given time. I mean, I've seen brands that are sitting on unfortunately, sitting on like a year's worth of inventory, which is not a good place to be in, but it can happen. Then you've got the amount of time that it takes to receive payment from your customer. If you're selling on Shopify, that's probably going to be, a couple of days, right? Shopify gives you your money fairly quickly. If you're selling on Amazon, it could be 2 weeks before you receive that customer payment. If you were selling into retail, like a Target or a Walmart or something, it could be months before you receive that payment, right? 60, 90 days, I don't know. So both of those elements obviously add up. The longer they are, they grow your cash conversion cycle. The offset, or the element that reduces your cash conversion cycle, is the payment terms that you have with your supplier and vendor. So if you have to pay your supplier before the inventory ships, then that extends your cash conversion cycle. If, however, you've got a good relationship with your supplier or vendor and they give you payment terms, then essentially those payment terms basically help you reduce your cash conversion cycle. Now, why is this a problem? Well, when cash is locked up in this cash conversion cycle, there's nothing else you can do with it. This is cash that you can't spend on ads. You can't spend it on hiring people. You can't spend it on your next product launch, right? It is a constraint. And the reality of the world that I operate in, working with earlier stage, often bootstrap founders, their reality is that cash is a huge constraint. And if we have too much cash locked up in this cash conversion cycle, it limits them, it constrains them. Like, it puts a cap on the number of other things that we can afford to do. So what we need to figure out is, how can we get cash moving through this cash conversion cycle faster? Because if cash moves faster through it, it makes more cash available to then invest in other things like growth. Make sense?
Totally makes sense. Yes. So huge constraint basically from in terms of what you can actually spend that money on, and you could lock yourself up essentially, right? Just by not having perhaps negotiated too well on either side.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So practical ways to potentially buy yourself more space to make investments to try and grow the business faster, right?
Absolutely. It's actually particularly problematic for fast growing brands. It is mathematically and theoretically possible to have a brand that's fast growing and profitable on the profit and loss statement. That business can go bankrupt. It can run out of cash, because as you're scaling revenue, you also need to scale the amount of inventory. And if you have a very long cash conversion cycle, it's possible that the cash that you're outlaying for inventory exceeds the operational cash flow that the business is generating. And hence, you can theoretically, run into a bankruptcy or a liquidity problem with a business like that, and be unable to pay your bills. So yeah, it's super important, and something that I think every e-com founder needs to track and understand.
Talking about growth, I believe often founders think they need to launch new products to grow. What do you think about that?
Interesting topic. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I kind of put founders into one of three buckets. So the first type is the designer, creator, product person. They're often, a subject matter expert. I actually worked with a founder a little while ago who's a nutritionist, and she's got a supplement brand. Okay. So that's an example of this first category. These sorts of founders love to be product focused. They love designing, they love developing, they love launching, they love, talking and developing products. I worked with an example of this founder a little while ago, and one of the metrics I had to, show to her was her revenue per SKU. Like, how much annual dollars revenue are you actually generating for every SKU in her catalog? And it was like $6,000, which was a bit of a reality check for her. And I used it to basically convince her that she'd just been way too focused on products and widgets and SKUs and had spent too much time doing that. The next type of founder that I encounter sometimes is, I guess I'd call them the PPC media buying person. They understand the math behind Meta. They might have had some experience working at an agency. They know how to manage an ad account. These people usually, have got a pretty good handle on the unit economics around customer acquisition. And as long as they understand that math, they're often happy to keep chugging along, buying more ads, shipping more products. And as long as that math keeps working for them, fine. They tend to be a lot less focused on the product side of things. Then the third group, which frankly tends to make the best customers for me, is what I call the business owners. They tend to be a little bit more pragmatic. They're not really expert in any one discipline, but they, are interested in, being across all disciplines. They're usually, in my experience, a little bit on the older side. I don't, find too many 20 or 30-year-olds that think like this, but by the time they get into their 40s and 50s, they're a bit more inclined to just think pragmatically as a business owner. Is this good ROI? Does this, help grow profitability? And they're usually a lot more coachable, and they'll do, happy to take guidance from someone like me. And if we need more products because we have a LTV problem or a lifetime gross profit problem, then we'll go down that path. But I don't think you can really categorically say, is more products a good or bad thing? Some businesses, they need it if they're going to grow because there's kind of unmet customer needs, or we've got a financial math problem that doesn't work without more products. But there's certainly, I certainly come across a lot of examples of businesses that have way too many products, and they would make their lives a lot easier if they cut back. By the way, have you come across a report called the JAM study?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so this was a study that a bunch of researchers did a bunch of years back, and it's very relevant to an e-commerce context, which is why I'm sharing it. What they basically did is set up this jam display in a supermarket, and they initially had like 6 different varieties of jam and offered people to sample the jam and then gave them a coupon so they could track how many people bought the jam after sampling. And they then repeated the experiment. And a second time, I think they had like 24 different flavors of jam. And the thinking was that more flavors of jam, it's more likely that someone's going to find what they want, and therefore they're more likely to make a purchase. But what they found in this experiment was actually the complete opposite. And people were less likely to make a purchase when there was 24 different options to choose from. And the reason is that when you give people that many options, you create cognitive overload, and you increase their fear of making a bad decision, right? Mm-hmm. There's a 23 and 24 chance that I picked the wrong flavor now. And so I don't want to make a bad decision because that's not a pleasant experience. So I'll just make no decision at all. And therefore I'm not going to buy any damn jam, and we'll walk out of here without making a purchase. And anyway, I think I'm sharing that because I think a lot of e-com operators fall into that mistake. They have too many flavors of jam.
Yeah. It's kind of the paradox of choice, right? I think that term has been used in a similar context.
Exactly.
And useful to keep in mind. Sometimes simplifying the number of options might actually result in a higher conversion because you're just making it intellectually easier to make that choice, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious about places you've seen founders that work with you go find opportunities for growth in places that were unexpected, that maybe they didn't anticipate, but that through your work you were able to uncover.
Are you thinking about that in terms of business optimization, or are you thinking about it in terms of like channels and marketing efforts?
It could be both. It could be top line growth. It could also just be improvements to the business that ultimately led to a better maybe valuation for the business, a
Yeah.
better business to run.
Got it. Yeah. Well, I would say that something that I go through with a lot of my founders is helping them identify opportunities that they hadn't previously seen. So founders have a tendency to be distracted by shiny objects. And within the ecom world, I think a lot of those shiny objects come from the marketing side of things, right? The next attribution tool or content created. These days, it's obviously AI driven, this, that, and everything else, right? Like we're constantly flooded with these shiny objects and widgets on the marketing and sales side. And I think a lot of that excitement and flashiness attracts a lot of attention from founders. And amongst the population of people that I interact with, I see what, in my opinion, is too much attention being allocated to shiny, marketing widgets and toys. What I spend my time doing is, I'm trying to think of a positive spin to put on this. But what I spend a lot of my time doing is convincing people that the riches are in doing the boring stuff, right? You get rich and you make more profit by doing the boring things well. And that includes stuff like, tracking your margins, being disciplined with your customer acquisition costs, inventory, of course, right? Doing proper inventory management, making sure that you're forecasting your inventory correctly. Getting rid of aging inventory, clearing it out so that you're not accruing excess storage costs, making sure that you negotiate your contracts correctly and get the best rates that you can, and understanding the T's and C's on the financing tools that you might be using to scale your business. Now, none of this is, as you're hearing me talk about it, none of this really screams sexy and exciting, right? A lot of people, their eyes roll over and I get blank stares when you start talking about this sort of stuff. But I truly, truly believe that, the more time you can spend doing this, boring stuff, as I'll call it, the greater the financial outcomes you're likely to achieve. And that's an ongoing and perpetual challenge I have with my clients, is trying to get them to focus on this, boring stuff, because unfortunately, it's the stuff that makes them profitable.
Something perhaps related, but it reminded me of it as you were talking, is you often talk about a hustle culture, right? And maybe an opportunity to do less. Can you speak a bit to that?
Yeah, for sure. So again, I'm kind of reflecting on my own experience as a founder here. Particularly when I was getting started, I was kind of like a kid in a candy store, right? I mean, I just talked about the flashy widgets and the AI. Like, I was a victim to all that stuff when I was getting started. And every time you have a conversation with a friend, family, whatever, everyone wants to help you, as when you go around and say, hey, I'm launching this business. And, everyone's got a cousin who's a graphic designer, or a friend who runs TikTok ads, or, whatever it is. And you're constantly getting these opportunities and ideas and shiny objects put in front of you. But the biggest lesson for me from my time as a founder was realizing that exploring all this stuff and, learning all about all of these new toys was not actually making me successful. And coming to that realization and realizing that I needed to focus and be incredibly disciplined with how I spent and allocated my time was the single biggest unlock I think I ever had as a founder and an operator of one of these businesses. And I kind of fell in love with the OKR, or the objective and key result framework, and have been using that now in my own business and helping other people implement it for probably 6 or 7 years now. So that's been, huge to me. These days, I help a lot of my clients with achieving that point of focus. And I've got a bunch of frameworks that I, help people help people go through to determine what are the battles that they should fight. And the answer to that question, whether it's about, hey, we need to open up this channel, or we need to optimize this product, or we need to be focused on the cost, like the thing that you should be focused on in your business is not the thing that your buddy who also runs an e-commerce business is focused on as well. It's unique to every single founder and every single business. We've all got a different thing that we should be spending our time and attention on.
Right. So you almost really just have to go back to the basics, understand your business better from the fundamentals, right? And then be focused in that execution. Is it down just to discipline, or is there anything else that can help?
I think discipline's a part of it. Some of the frameworks that I use with my clients are firstly a ROI, or financial math framework. So when clients are constantly throwing ideas and like, hey, what do you think of this? Should I do that? Should I hire this person? Like, I collect all of those ideas for my founders. I actually put them on a big Notion board. And what we do periodically is we go through and review them. And when I'm doing this review, the first thing I want to do is understand, what does the numbers potentially look like? If we got this right and if it worked, what does that mean in terms of profit or return? And what is the investment, right? In terms of dollars, time, or some combination of the two. So when you know what we could potentially win in terms of return and the investment, we can calculate ROI. So that's metric one. The next thing I'll do is look at a bottleneck analysis, right? I'm sure everyone's familiar with the concept of a bottleneck. In businesses like these, there's a lot of ways that you can apply the concept of a bottleneck. The most obvious is to think about the website, right? You've got traffic, you've got a conversion rate, you've got an average order value, you've got repeat purchase behavior, right? That's how traffic and customers kind of flow through your business. By using, benchmarking and looking at history and understanding what the rest of the industry is doing, we can always, we should always be able to identify a bottleneck in every single process. So if, for example, we have a business where the traffic's good, but the conversion rate's only, 1%, then we've probably got a conversion rate problem. So we need to allocate time, resources, people to the conversion rate problem. And whenever you're doing that, you are by definition going to be increasing the capacity or throughput of the whole system. And when you can do that, that is going to be a high return on your time. So I do things like that, and not just looking at the website, but it might also be about creative, right? I got a couple of clients now where I think we have a problem on our cost per click, and the bottleneck is about creative volume, right? We don't have enough creative assets coming into the ad account. And so what we're trying to do is figure out how we can increase the volume of creative that we have coming through the business. Like, what are the assets? What are the budget? What are the people that we need to funnel more creative through this ad account? So that's another example. The third framework I use is, I guess you'd describe it as a skills alignment exercise. And the thinking here is that when you're dealing with a 7-figure founder, so the reality of a lot of the business and the clients that I work with is that they have a finite talent pool to pull from, right? They might have a team of 2 to 8 people. This is not Amazon.com. We don't have millions of people working here. So it's not like we have experts in every single field and discipline. The reality with these businesses is that we're good at a very, very small number of things. So rather than try to take on projects that we know absolutely freaking nothing about and we've got no experience with and we're starting from square one, how do we find projects and opportunities that are actually aligned with the team's skills, competencies, and interest? Because when you can, the way I kind of put it to people, my job is to basically put balls in front of the founders that they can kick into goal, right? Doesn't help anyone if I put a bowling ball in front of you and tell you to kick it 200 yards down the other end of the field, because you're going to break your toe and the bowling ball's not going to go 200 yards. That's just a waste of everyone's time. So what I'm trying to do when I'm looking at skills alignment is understand the founder, understand the team, understand, the types of problems and projects that they can excel at executing on, and figuring out how we can align that with what the business needs, and therefore what are the things and projects that we should ultimately be focused on.
Makes total sense. So, work with what you have and use the team you have and their skills the best possible way, rather than trying to, again, maybe chase some shiny new idea that maybe you're just not equipped for.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
Awesome. Well, I think we covered a lot. It was very, very interesting and very educational for me as well. Thank you, Nate. I think that's it. If people want to find out more, where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is futurereadycfo.com. I am most active on the socials on LinkedIn. Nathan Littlewood is my handle. Should be pretty easy to find. Yeah, feel free to hit me up through there, and always down for a conversation about the ecom space, and especially if it's got an element of finance in it, then yeah, happy to chat.
Thank you, Nate.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.